The Vietnam War has been an event that left deep traces on our world, and it still affects us today. Imagine a land divided, where one side fights for a communist society while the other aims for a democratic future. In the midst of this chaos was a man named Ho Chi Minh. He dreamed of a free Vietnam, away from colonial control. With ideals from China and Russia, he took a bold stand against powerful invaders. He formed the Viet Minh, striving for Vietnam's independence.
This brings us to the heart of our podcast discussion. The Vietnam War was more than just a battle. It was a complex conflict that split nations and ideologies. It's a story of determination, pain, and division. In today's episode, we'll explore the roots of this war, starting with how colonization shaped Vietnam's future. We aim to unravel the intricate layers of this divisive war, examining the roles played by key figures and the impact on society as a whole.
Let's dive into Vietnam's colonial past, a key part of this complex story. French colonization of Vietnam began in 1877. The French colonial rule deeply affected the country's social and economic structures. The influence was most visible in the cities, where Western culture and ideas started to take root. Emperor Bao Dai also played a significant role during this period, acting as a figurehead. Though he was from Vietnam, his education in France and close ties with Western politics brought a unique perspective.
Exactly. And then came an even more turbulent time with the Japanese occupation during World War II. This period marked the beginning of serious resistance. Ho Chi Minh, inspired by communist nations such as China and Russia, saw an opportunity to push back against the invaders. He didn't just want to oppose the French, but the Japanese too. By forming the Viet Minh, Ho Chi Minh led the efforts to gain independence. This initial resistance laid the foundation for what would become a much larger conflict.
So, after World War II, the world saw significant changes in power dynamics, especially in places like Vietnam. The Allies had just won, and Japan left Vietnam, marking a new chapter in the region. It was around this time that the Viet Minh saw a chance to make their move. They took over Hanoi in August 1945, setting the stage for what they hoped would be a new, independent Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh stepped forward, declaring himself the president of a democratic Vietnam. This was a bold step towards claiming their independence.
Absolutely, and this move didn't sit well with everyone, especially the French. They viewed the Viet Minh's actions as a direct challenge to their colonial interests in the region. In response, they threw their support behind Emperor Bao Dai, hoping to maintain their influence. France essentially set up the French-run state of Vietnam in 1949, with Saigon as its capital. Both Ho Chi Minh and Bao Dai wanted a united Vietnam, but their visions were drastically different. This clash set the scene for the intense and prolonged conflict that would follow, as both sides fought to shape Vietnam's future.
So in our last discussion, we talked about how the Viet Minh gained control over Hanoi and the French reaction to this. Now let's move forward to a decisive moment in this conflict, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. This battle was really significant because it marked a turning point in the war. The Viet Minh, under General Vo Nguyen Giap, managed to defeat the French forces. This victory was not just a military success, but it also boosted the morale of the communist forces in Vietnam. They showed that they could stand up against a powerful colonial power.
Absolutely, and the result of this battle was far-reaching. It led to the 1954 Geneva Accords, which officially split Vietnam along the 17th parallel. This division created two separate states, with Ho Chi Minh leading the north and Emperor Bao Dai in the south. But both sides saw this as a temporary solution. They agreed to hold national elections in 2 years to reunite the country, though these elections never happened. This split set the stage for rising tensions, especially in the south.
That's right. The cancellation of those elections only added fuel to the fire. In fact, it was the beginning of a much larger conflict. Bao Dai was ousted when Ngo Dinh Diem took control of the South. Diem's strong anti-communist stance caught the attention of the United States. The U.S., led by Eisenhower, saw Vietnam as a key battleground in the Cold War. They were concerned about the spread of communism and believed in the domino theory, the idea that if one country fell under communism, neighboring ones would follow.
And that concern is exactly what drew America into the conflict. Eisenhower's administration began to support Diem's government with more aid and military advisors. This marked the starting point of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Although it began with a focus on providing support, it soon grew into a full-fledged military presence. The situation in Vietnam was quickly spiraling out of control, setting the stage for what would become one of the most controversial wars in modern history.
Previously, we touched on the rise of Ngo Dinh Diem in South Vietnam after Bao Dai was ousted. Diem was a strong anti-communist and quickly caught the attention of the United States. His government became an essential piece for the U.S. during the Cold War era. The Americans saw the fight against communism in Vietnam as a crucial step. They believed that if Vietnam turned communist, other countries in the region might soon follow.
Yes, and this is what led to the increased U.S. involvement in Vietnam's affairs. Under John F. Kennedy, the U.S. started by sending military advisors to help support Diem's government. This was before the conflict escalated. But things took a more serious turn after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. Northern Vietnamese torpedo boats were alleged to have attacked U.S. ships. This event prompted President Lyndon B. Johnson to push for greater military engagement in Vietnam.
The incident in the Gulf of Tonkin gave the U.S. a reason to escalate their presence. It led to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave Johnson the authority to use military force in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. This resolution changed the landscape of the American involvement. Soon after, Operation Rolling Thunder was initiated. This was a continuous bombing campaign against North Vietnam, aiming to pressure them into negotiations and stopping their support of the Viet Cong in the South.
Operation Rolling Thunder marked a significant shift in U.S. policy. It wasn't just about advising and supporting anymore. It was now about direct military action. The bombing raids targeted strategic sites in the north, but they also affected many civilian regions. Meanwhile, tensions continued to rise on both sides. U.S. troops on the ground increased in numbers, reaching tens of thousands. This period was pivotal because it transitioned the conflict into the full-scale war we now know.
Now that we've set the stage for America's deeper involvement, let's talk about the international picture. Besides the U.S., South Vietnam also gained support from different countries like South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. These nations sent troops to help fight against North Vietnam, although their contributions were not as large as that of the U.S. Still, the presence of these allies was significant in the broader context of the Cold War. They wanted to prevent the spread of communism, similar to the Americans.
That's true. The U.S. strategy was focused on military operations to weaken the opposition. In South Vietnam, the U.S. troops were instructed to carry out missions that aimed at diminishing the strength of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. One major approach was to designate certain areas as free-fire zones. In these zones, American forces could fire at will, assuming that any person left in these areas was an enemy. This strategy aimed to weaken Ho Chi Minh's supporters, but it had terrible consequences for civilians.
Exactly, and those free-fire zones caused immense suffering to ordinary people. Villages were destroyed, and many people had to flee their homes. This led to a significant refugee crisis. Countless Vietnamese families found themselves displaced, forced to seek shelter in makeshift camps around places like Saigon. Life was extremely difficult in these camps due to overcrowding and lack of essential supplies. The daily lives of these refugees were disrupted, with little hope of returning to their normal lives anytime soon.
The impact on civilians cannot be understated. Many of those who managed to escape the free fire zones struggled to survive in areas that were strained under the pressure of war. The war wasn't just fought in the jungles, but it deeply affected urban centers, as the massive influx of refugees put these areas to the test. Housing, healthcare, and schools were overburdened. This situation further fueled the desire for peace and stability, a wish shared by many Vietnamese who just wanted an end to their suffering.
As the war dragged on, voices of dissent grew louder back home in the United States. More and more people started joining the anti-war movement. It was no small crowd. Students, veterans, and activists of all stripes came together, demanding an end to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The media played a crucial role, showing images of the war that left a strong impact on the public. These images turned into powerful symbols of the unjust nature of the conflict, sparking even more protests and calls for peace.
Yes, and those harrowing images stirred emotions across the nation. Soldiers returning home brought their experiences, which only fueled the growing distrust. Many soldiers had turned to drugs as a means to cope with the harsh realities of war. It was a challenging time. Morale was low, and desertions were rising. Troops faced not only physical battles, but also psychological strains. The Tet Offensive of 1968 further highlighted this divide. Although militarily repelled, it was a psychological victory for Vietnam, as it showed the conflict was far from over.
You've touched on an important point. The Tet Offensive was a pivotal moment in the Vietnam War. It shattered the illusion that the U.S. was winning and made the American public question the veracity of official statements. The Johnson administration faced a significant public relations crisis. Support for the war waned as more people demanded the withdrawal of American troops. The immense costs involved, both human and financial, added fire to the anti-war movement. The challenge for those in charge was reconciling military objectives with public sentiment.
Indeed, reconciling those differences became more difficult as time went on. The psychological impact on American soldiers couldn't be overstated, with many veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The legacy of drug use, introduced to cope with the horrors of war, lingered long after the conflict ended. As society grappled with rising anti-war sentiment, these soldiers faced their demons. Many struggled to reintegrate into society, further complicating America's relationship with this controversial war. The debate over the necessity and morality of the Vietnam War continued for years, leaving deep divisions within the fabric of American society.
As we wrap up this discussion on the Vietnam War, it's important to reflect on the lasting impact this conflict has had, not just on Vietnam, but on the world stage. The Vietnam War has left a legacy that still affects international relations and how wars are perceived, highlighting the deep scars it left on society and the lessons it forced us to learn. Studying these moments in history helps us understand the complexities of political and social changes.
We hope today's episode has sparked your interest in exploring more about the Vietnam War and its repercussions. History offers us valuable insights, and by understanding these events, we become better equipped for the future. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the like button and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support helps us continue to bring you engaging content. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more episodes. Thank you for listening.